Good evening, welcome to the channel. I'm Curtis with Cole's Mower and Equipment Repair Service. And this evening we're dealing with a more and more common problem that we're seeing in the shop is issues with rewinds and flywheels on these new style Briggs engines. So we've got a little Murray push mower, and this guy, the rewind, all of the bolts are stripped out that hold the rewind assembly onto the engine. And so what goes on underneath here is this thing has a sheet metal pan under the flywheel that holds that rewind on. In addition to the bolts being damaged on this one, I've seen a lot of these come in where something has landed on top of the mower, like another mower in a box at the store, or somebody stepped on it and has actually deformed this sheet metal piece in such a way that the rewind hangs or doesn't work properly. So in order to get this sheet metal piece off, we got to pull the flywheel. So to do the flywheel pull on these, the sheet metal piece keeps us from putting some kind of effective lever underneath here. So to do this without damaging anything, we're actually going to pull the flywheel with a puller. And in order to do that, we're going to drill into these holes a little bit that are given to us by Briggs with a, let's see, with a 7/32 drill bit, and then we're going to tap these to a 1/4 28 thread, and we're going to use a gear puller to pull these things off. So next step, drill these, and then we'll tap them, and then we'll pull. So the drill set up 7/32. Just going to make sure these holes are actually deep enough and square. Sometimes when we get into one of these, the holes aren't very deep, or they're just kind of cone shaped. And so we're going to true this up, make it a cylinder, and make it where it'll take threads. Next step is we're going to get our handy dandy tap and die kit. You can get these kits for probably around $17, $18 at Harbor Freight. And what we're going to use out of this kit, this is the SAE kit, is the 1/4 inch fine thread tap. And then we have a gear puller kit, also from Harbor Freight. Should get pretty cheap if you're going to do this a lot. Got a couple of 1/4 28 bolts, and then our little turkey foot puller. So we're going to tap the holes, put some threads in them, in this flywheel real quick. So the bolts will have something to bite into them. And this aluminum is pretty soft metal, so this work tends to go pretty quick. Just turn that tap in there so it hits the bottom. You don't want to put too much twist on it, might break it off in there, and that's a whole nother fiasco to deal with. Alright, we've got some threads cut in there. Let's check and make sure they hold the bolt decently. That one feels good. This one feels pretty good. Should do what we need to do. Next up, let's set our puller up. So our puller consists of this little turkey foot plate, a threaded puller shaft, and a little cone adapter. And that's going to go against the end of the crank here. So we'll balance this little guy up here. And the real trick is actually going to be making sure that we have enough bolt. Yep, just enough. Reach down here. Get both of them started. Run them up hanger tight here. And take the slack out of the puller. And let's see. Guys are snug in there. Alright, those are settled in. This puller, I believe it's a 5/8. Maybe 9/16. Let's use a crescent wrench. I'm going to put a little torque on here. Sometimes these things will just pop loose. Sometimes they won't. If they don't despair. Just take a little hammer and tap it a couple times as you put more torque on it, and we'll see if it pops off. Okay, so continuing on, we put a little bit of torque on this flywheel puller. We got some pressure on the flywheel. It's still firmly on the crankshaft, and so after you put a little pressure on there and if nothing happens, then you take a hammer. And you don't want to swing and go crazy with this thing. You just start gently tapping. On that flywheel, and it felt like something good. There was a little a little more. Pretty stuck. There we go, our flywheel just popped loose. So we'll take the puller and one couple threads in there. Ah, and there she came. Right on there. Okay. Well, now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts actually holding this sheet metal assembly to the engine block. Looks like it's probably going to clear our coil when we take those loose. And then we've got our kill switch and flywheel brake mechanism over here. This one's also missing its spring. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the sheet metal piece off, swap it out, and take our flywheel brake off. We've got a donor engine over here that's actually got a bent crankshaft, same series of engine. And so we're going to go ahead and we'll pop this flywheel and drop the sheet metal piece off and the engine control mechanism and bolt them up on here. So come back in a second and we'll pull that flywheel off. Okay, we've got our donor engine set up over here. We're going to do the flywheel removal on it as well. This is the unit we're taking the recoil base off of and the engine control mechanism. So this one was a little already stripped down, but the flywheel hasn't been prepared for removal yet. So we're going to go ahead and take our drill in 7/30 seconds, and we'll just open these holes up a little bit. Okay, we've got our donor engine here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to perform the flywheel removal. We're going to do it a little closer so everybody can get a really good look at what's going on here. We've got our 7/30 seconds drill bit in the drill. We're going to true these holes up. Make them a little deeper. That way, our puller bolts get plenty of bite. We'll drill those, and we're going to blow out all the shavings. I got our quarter 28 fine thread tap. Okay, got our donor motor here. We've got the holes drilled and trued up. Now we're going to tap these holes to quarter 28 fine thread. Clear out the dust. Alright, I'll set our puller back up. Let's take the slack out of this puller. Get the puller. Couple taps. And it's like this one came off the first shot. Alright, this one the flywheel key is also loose. This mower has a bent crankshaft, and so, well, amazingly, it bent the crankshaft, but it didn't quite destroy the flywheel key. There's a little line right there, and there's a little groove in this one where it started to shear. A lot of times you hit a rock or a tree stump or something like that and stop one of these little Briggs engines quickly. The mass of the flywheel that's turning will continue to spin, and in order to keep from damaging the flywheel or damaging the crankshaft, all these Briggs engines are built with this aluminum flywheel key that shears whenever that happens. Okay, next step is we're going to remove our little sheet metal recoil assembly base and our engine brake cable mount assembly. And on these rewind bases, there's actually an engine breather with Permatex sealing compound underneath this, between it and the engine block, right here where this little hose comes out. So we got to put some form a gasket on that when we go back together. We have to clean that up. So next step is pull this little piece off. So got our handy dandy zip zapper here. Pop these 5/16 or 8mm headed screws out. And then you'll notice the base doesn't just come off, it's glued down by that silicone gasket. So we're going to put a little pressure back here and wiggle this thing and see if we can get it to break loose. Otherwise we may have to get a little screwdriver or something and pry up on it. Main thing is we don't want to distort the base too much, because we do want the rewind to work after all. Here, we'll do it. Alright, we got it working. Just give it a little wiggle. And pop it up. And you can just lift it clear of the ignition coil. And you can see this is the silicone gasket sealer. that was on there for this breather assembly. This thing's been sitting out in the weather a little bit. I'll get some water down in that breather. We'll get a close up of the breather. Apparently no one's going to see a whole lot of these very often. There's a little flapper check valve in there. This hose goes around to the back side of the air filter, and this is what helps the inside of the engine maintain the air pressure so that it doesn't blow the seals out of the engine as the piston goes back and forth. So that is what's called the breather. Alright, this motor, we're going to rob this brake mechanism off. Got two bolts right there, one short one, one long one for the pivot. And you'll notice there's a kill wire mechanism right here. This thing is really handy. Briggs has been using the same system for many, many years. We've got this little sheet metal kill switch mechanism that our handlebar cable is attached to. This little thing has got the spring, pivots around here, grounds this out, and that's what kills the engine. This is our engine control wire. We're going to push down on this tab and just pull that wire loose and slip this whole brake assembly off. This is a one piece, it's all riveted together, so you'll simply transfer that over to whatever else you're working on, put it back on. Next up, I'm going to put some sealing compound on this breather, close out, install this rewind base on the other engine, put the brake mechanism on, and we'll put the new flywheel with a new keyway back on here, and we'll button it up and see if our rewind works. So our kill cable is going to go under this dude. You can stop. Okay, going back together, we're going to put our brake assembly back on here. We've got the long bolt on the pivot side, short bolt on the sheet metal side. Take a 5/16, 8mm wrench, tighten these two down. We're going to run our kill wire up around the back of that. Straighten this little wire out. Hook it in there. Like I said, all you gotta do is push down with your thumbnail on that. Route the wire away from the governor arm. Next, we're going to install the rewind sheet metal base, and we're going to put a little RTV. We got some black Permatex here, and I'm going to put a new bead on here. I'm just going to leave this old in place. It wasn't leaking, and it's kind of actually stiff enough. It's going to give me something to hold this in place and keep me from smearing and knocking off the new stuff as I'm putting it on. So that stays in place and I'm not knocking my new goo out of the way. So take this thing and I'm going to tuck it under the coil. I'm going to pull back on this brake a little bit so that it will clear. And we'll tuck this thing down and drop it into place. And put our 5 bolts back in to hold the rewind base, engine shroud, whatever you want to call this thing. We're going to start all 5 of the bolts. I'm going to do these two right here at the breather first. Tighten them down. I'll do back and forth. A crisscross pattern. Alright, this dude's set up. Now, we're going to put the flywheel back on, and with this one, what I'm going to do, I always try to keep these flywheels and engines together. There's probably no real big difference between this flywheel and the flywheel we pulled off that donor engine, but sometimes there's a difference in the magnet position depending on what the horsepower is. There could be just a number of different little details, and the one thing that we don't want to do is introduce a problem. And so we're going to keep the coil, the engine block, and the flywheel all together. That way we don't end up with some sort of weird harmonics issue or timing issue. This one had a good flywheel key. It's still firmly corroded into the flywheel. So the other thing you don't want to do not put grease, oil, any kind of solvent, anything liquid on this shaft or threads when you're working on one of these flywheels. This tapered shaft, tapered bore in this flywheel, this is a friction fit. So if we put any grease, oil, or anything like that and go and tighten this thing down, it's just going to keep on spreading. We may damage the flywheel when we're trying to torque it. In addition, it's going to give it some lubrication, and then we hit just the slightest thing, we'll be shearing that flywheel key. So always install the flywheels dry. As dry as you can get them. You can take and clean this up with a wire wheel, just make for sure this thing is dry. I'm not going to do any cleaning to this one, it's just going to go back on au naturel. I'm going to push back on the brake, pull down our zone start handle. Get the flywheel into position. Slip right down in there into place. And our next step is to install our recoil pawl assembly, P-A-W-L. So this little castle cup nut thing is what the rewind pulley engages to turn the flywheel. It's got two little lugs on the bottom side that line it right there. They've got a handy dandy washer that keeps it centered up as we're torquing it down, and we got a nut. So, like I said, no oil on this if at all possible. Keep from messing with our flywheel interface. And we're going to tighten this up. We've got a 24mm 15/16 socket and impact that we're going to use on this. So pop this together real quick and give it a little zap. Alright, that's good and tight there. Our brake is holding. So our next step, we'll hook up our zone start cable here. Underneath. And we'll pull down our handlebar. And free our engine up. And what we're going to have to do on this little guy is we're going to adjust our flywheel so that it's not dragging against our coil now. Somehow now that we've changed that relationship. So we'll get a 1/4 inch socket and we'll break the coil loose. And we'll get a piece of cardstock and set the air gap between our coil and our flywheel. And turn the flywheel around. Make sure while we're doing this that the spark plug is of course disconnected so that we don't inadvertently start this thing. And we're going to turn the motor so that the magnet on the flywheel and the coil are aligned with each other. And we'll get our cardstock in there and set the air gap. I'm going to use a piece of cardstock. You want something probably between 15, 20, 25, 30 seconds. 25 thousandths gap is usually pretty good in these circumstances. Or a little less. That magnet is helping set the gap. And we'll turn the flywheel and get our cardstock out of there. We'll release the brake. And everything's clear. We're ready for our gas tank to go back in the shroud here. And our rewind assembly. Gonna go down on here. We've got our 3 shoulder bolts to hold the rewind on. We'll line these guys up. 5/16 socket. Zap. Zap. Zap.